Let's get started. It cannot be overemphasized that the tiered salary system only works with a salary cap in place. Leagues without salary caps, like Major League Baseball, are a different issue. It's a mistake to think that free agency was ever a thoughtful decision. Before free agency, there was the reserve clause, which bound players to teams forever, with or without a contract, unless they were traded, released, or re-signed. The reserve clause was unfair, and it was rightfully abolished in the mid-1970s. When it was abolished, free agency came about by default. There was no group decision deciding free agency was the best option. There was no consensus. There was no meeting of the minds. There were no alternatives presented. Free agency simply filled the void when the reserve clause was abolished. Given its haphazard beginnings, it's not surprising to realize that free agency doesn't really work well. Teams and players gamble on multi-year contracts, which sometimes work out and sometimes don't. Players important to the team can suddenly leave for higher paying contracts, putting the fortunes of the team in jeopardy. The reality is that the deficiencies of free agency have already been well accepted, but not always thought of in those terms. Owners and league officials understand that a successful, organized athletic league cannot have excessive, detrimental player movement among teams. Free agency does not provide the necessary structure for orderly player movement. Out of necessity, player movement has become more and more restricted to keep the league successful. Years of service requirements, franchise tags, and other modifications attest to the fact that free agency, by itself, would lead to chaotic player movement. The better answer, however, is not to continue the eternal search for the perfect cocktail of free agency modifications. The answer is a fundamentally better system. Owners face the necessity of making huge investments on high-priced free agents, which sometimes pay off and sometimes backfire. A bad free agency signing can hamper a team for several years while it struggles for salary cap space to field a competitive team. As long as multi-year contracts are part of the business, owners, their teams, and their communities are at risk. Free agency is a problem for players, but it is not as simple to see. Players should want a system that is fair and predictable. A certain level of performance should lead to a certain salary level. But free agency does not link salary with performance well, since no one can predict how a player will perform years into the future. Players may also like long-term contracts for reasons of financial security, but the protection is erratic. An injury in the beginning of a player's contract may offer a lot of security. An injury at the end of his contract yields very little security. Financial security is also dependent on the business judgment of the player and his agents. Financial protection is dependent on timing, luck, and negotiating strategy. In the tiered salary system, financial security can be created in ways that are more predictable and consistent. This will be highlighted in the third video. Players all need to be very aware that the whole salary structure for most active, productive players are systematically reduced by the three hidden taxes. The first two are miscalculations made by team executives who paid players too much for their multi-year contracts. When it's paid to players no longer on the team, it's called dead money. There's no accepted name for overpaying players still on the team, so we'll just call it overpayment. These miscalculations are inevitable byproducts of multi-year contracts, so it will always take a bite out of paychecks for players who are earning it on the field. In addition, 2 to 3% of players' salaries are paid to agents, which is an avoidable expense. All in all, players who are productive on the field lose a lot of their income, likely 12 to 15%. The best system for players is to keep it simple and reliable. Good play gets good pay. A better system would have a more rational and consensus-based distribution of salaries from the most to the least valuable players. A better system would provide financial security that was more consistent and predictable. A better system would have a system of player movement which would optimize fan interest and loyalty as well as athletic performance. A better system would be specially designed for professional sports, not a haphazard default system like free agency. A better system would be more predictable from year to year, and a better system wouldn't depend on tricky negotiations and complex business decisions. But a better system would only occur if free agency's flaws are recognized and someone makes an effort to create a better system. Until now, that has not happened. A better salary structure would have a more comprehensive system for how salaries are distributed among the players, decided by consensus. Teams should be able to keep their core players. These players are important for fans, and they are important for the athletic performance of the team. If teams keep a core group of players, the salaries for those players would have to be similar, making it more practical to arrange the salaries of the entire league on tiers. Finally, player selection would be facilitated by a modern computerized matching market. The next video will discuss the issue of matching markets and how they can benefit professional sports. In the third video, I will talk about the tiered salary system itself. In the fourth video, I will discuss some additional details of the system, including how salaries are generated, trades, rookies, and practice squads. In the last video, I will answer some of the anticipated arguments and concerns regarding the tiered salary system. You will be convinced.